Hello, listeners, and welcome to this episode of Criminology Chats. I'm your host, J.R. Rainbolt. Today, we're talking with Greg Cooper, the founder and executive director of the Cold Case Foundation, and Dean Jackson, the deputy executive director of the Cold Case Foundation. They will be talking to students at the Chicago School. Greg has an extensive professional background in the area of cold case investigations. He is a retired FBI agent and criminal profiler and served as a police chief in two different police departments. He has written two books. One is Predators, and the other book is a book about the Cold Case Foundation. You can find these books on Amazon.
Dean has more than 30 years of experience working in cold case homicide investigation, critical incident stress management, and autopsies. Dean is a frequent guest lecturer at university, law enforcement and fire agencies, victim assistant units, and business conferences. He provides training for the federally mandated Operation Lady Justice Presidential Task Force on missing and murdered American Alaska Natives. Dean is the author of Death Notifications, Delivering an Offensive Message in the Least Offensive Manner. You can find his book on Amazon. He has also appeared in The Confession Killer, a 2019 Netflix miniseries about Henry Lee. Please, let's welcome Greg and Dean.
Nice to meet everybody. Appreciate you guys all being here tonight. And we've been working with JR on quite a few cases here and have enjoyed working with him. And he asked us to come tonight and share a few insights as to what we do with the foundation and give you a little bit of history. I'll say right off the bat, Greg's the profiler and he's got the FBI background. So I have a little bit different journey to the table. I actually started out in the coroner's office and worked there, and also did work over the years also as a chaplain for agencies. I've known Greg for about 26 years, I think it is, 25, 26 years. When he got ready to start the foundation about 13 years ago, he asked me if I'd be willing to come on board and work with him, and a tremendous opportunity.
Dean, at the very beginning of the presentation here, you showed us a police press conference video where they mentioned the fact that the Cold Case Foundation worked with the police on the case of Maya May Maletti. The audience couldn't see that, so would you please tell us what you can about how the foundation worked on that case with them?
Can't get into a lot of the details because it's still in the process of going through a trial, but I can tell you that Maya went missing in January of 2021, and we were initially contacted by the police department. And as sometimes happens, there were some communication things that had broken down between law enforcement and the family, and so we were involved in a process of helping to reconnect there, as well as assisting them with various resources. And we met with them on a very consistent, regular basis through the process up until the arrest on October 19th.
Well, that was a great resolution in the case. Through the foundation's contributions, things went well and an arrest was made. And that's what we want as law enforcement officers to see, that things worked out and the perpetrator was caught. And hopefully now, with the trial going on, that the family can get some resolution. The perpetrator can get, what they deserve. And just for our audience out there, please, when you get the chance, look that case up. I think you'll find it very interesting.
Greg, I know my fellow students are eager to hear about you and your career. Please tell us about that.
It's really great to be with you this evening. I'll talk a little bit about my background and experience and how we got to this point. I started my law enforcement career a long time ago as a patrolman in a medium-sized police department in Provo, Utah, if anybody is familiar with that area. And I spent about 5 years there as a patrolman and undercover narcotics officer. I stayed there for about 5 years, and while I was there, decided that I wanted to become an FBI agent and also a police chief. So whichever came first, that's what I was going to pursue. I decided to apply to the FBI. I was still a patrolman at the time, so I applied to the FBI, and unfortunately, the Bureau put on a hiring freeze for a number of years. And so, as luck or fate would have it, a small town out in southwestern Utah had a police chief job open up. For this little small department, it was a 6-man police department. So along with the influx in construction workers, they knew that there was going to be a significant increase in population with families. And I thought, well, why not apply? So I did. Make a long story short, I accepted this job as a police chief. it was a great experience for me.
Now, you are a police chief in a small Utah town. What sparked your fascination with the criminal profiling field?
About 2 years as the police chief, I had this flyer come across my desk, and it was advertising a class put on by the FBI at the Salt Lake Community College, and it was called criminal profiling. Well, it was a brand new concept back in that day. And I thought, well, this is something I have a real interest in. It was very fascinating. And I thought, man, it's so new. So I thought, I'm going to go ahead and attend this thing. So I attended this 3-day profiling school in Salt Lake City, put on by 2 FBI agents. Ken Lanning and Bill Hagmeyer were the 2 agents that were teaching this class. By the end of that course, I was convinced this is for me. This is what I want to be. I went back to my job, of course, and waiting to hear, hoping that the hiring freeze was going to come off with the FBI. And so about, maybe 2 months later, I get a phone call from the FBI in Salt Lake City, which is where I applied. And they asked me if I was still interested. And I said, well, absolutely. And I entered the Bureau in August of 1985, and focus was to become a profiler.
Greg encountered John Douglas, and of course he's renowned as the father of criminal profiling. And Greg met him whenever John, who was an FBI agent at the time and criminal profiler, visited the Seattle FBI office, which is where Greg was working out of at the time. And John was there assisting the Seattle FBI office on some unsolved cases, and was there to review the case of the Green River Killer, whom he had already established a profile on, the suspect at the time. And during their meeting, John shared some valuable insights and guidance to Greg on how to pursue a career as a criminal profiler within the FBI.
So I followed them to the T. I've become what was called at that time a coordinator for the field office called the National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime. And what that meant was you become a representative of the behavioral science unit, the profiling unit, in the field division that you're working, and then you help prepare the cases that are being submitted to the behavioral science unit by police departments within your division. So I had the opportunity to do that for a couple of years. Fortunately, within a year, I was called and offered a position as a profiler at the behavioral science unit. So I had that great experience of spending 5 years back at Quantico as a profiler, and also as the VICAP supervisor and the program manager. And I became John's relief supervisor, one of his assistant, if you will. So when he wasn't there, I supervised in his behalf.
Hey, Greg, please tell our students and our audience about the case that you worked on of Carl Stephen Mosley out of North Carolina.
On a Friday afternoon, I happened to be the only guy in the office. Everybody was gone, and the prosecutor, there were 2 cases that he was looking at, and this prosecutor wanted to know whether or not we could link these cases together behaviorally. There were two female sexual homicide victims. Once you become familiar with the concept of profiling, you have this tendency to look at things dissimilar sometimes to a conventional investigative approach. It's not necessarily a conventional approach. It stood out to me that, I think these 2 cases can be. I call the prosecutor, tell him, look, I think we can link these cases together behaviorally. For me, as a young profiler at that time, it was a tremendous learning experience, obviously, but it was a lot of pressure too, because I was a young profiler, I was a new profiler, and I was going to testify as a profiler. And if I screwed this case up, it was going to bring down a lot of bad attention. Everything went well. Fortunately, I testified against this offender twice, and fortunately, he was convicted twice. He received 2 separate death penalties. That was my experience in profiling.
Carl Stephen Mosley, even though he received 2 death penalty sentences, he died of natural causes in February of 2022 from a very painful bout with stomach cancer.
Tell us how you used your experience as a FBI criminal profiler to determine there was a need for your foundation.
As a result of that experience and recognizing the need for law enforcement agencies to have access to experts from around the country, not just experts in the area of profiling, but experts in all of the sciences. It's a small department, and a lot of medium-sized departments don't never have the experience of investigating a sexual homicide or a serial killer or a serial rapist, a serial child killer, the worst of the worst. And so when they're faced with these things, they need to have access to those experts so they can share with them what they see to assist them in resolving these cold cases. And that was the purpose of creating the Cold Case Foundation.
Dean is going to talk about who the primary clients are for the Cold Case Foundation, how the Cold Case Foundation gets their cases.
We're here to support law enforcement, victims' families. We consider our primary client to be the victim, and our secondary would be their family, as well as law enforcement. And because law enforcement also knows if there's no victim, there's no work for them to do. And so, having said that, though, a lot of times we get cases that start out with families reaching out to us, either because they're frustrated, they're confused. And so our role a lot of times is to help educate them. Our role is to sometimes help mediate and bring back the relationship, maybe has some stress related to it between law enforcement and the families. And I can tell you that when we started as an organization, the bulk of the cases that were coming in were coming actually from families. That has really changed over the years as we've participated in cases that have been successfully resolved. We now participate in cases right alongside law enforcement agencies. We have some cases we meet with their investigators once a week. We have some we meet with them bi-weekly. We have some that we meet monthly. Some we're on call. And then our job, as Greg said, we're on all day long working with our team and cases. But it's also not uncommon for us to get an email or contacted by somebody who says, hey, we've got this case. What do you think? Do you think this is moving in the right direction? And the reason for that is we're looking at everything from start to finish. And so a lot of times investigators want to talk to somebody who can kind of see it from a 30,000 foot level and make sure that, are we looking at everything we should, or are there things we should consider? I think the most quickest we've been pulled into a case is probably within a week to 2 weeks of it being committed. And I would consider that really off investigators saying, look, we want to make sure we've got our strategies lined out. Here's what we're seeing. What do you guys see? And what would you do? When you work these cases the way we do, you oftentimes go, boy, I wish at the beginning we would have done this or we could have done that. And so hindsight oftentimes is 2020. And so we're able to do that.
What kind of cases does the foundation review, provide assistance on? I would imagine you have to have some type of parameter set for what cases the foundation reviews and provides assistance to.
Our four primary areas are homicides, missing persons, unidentified bodies, and then sexual assaults with serial characteristics. And the reason for that is because not all, but many or most serial killers start out as serial rapists. And so we want to make sure that we're getting those cases and able to identify and catching them before they actually become serial killers. You can always go out to our website, see all of the different people Greg has referenced, as well as we have Cold Case Live, which we're currently getting ready to upgrade some things there. So you can still, if you're interested, one of the things that we were challenged with early on is there's so much interest in the true crime area, but unfortunately, a lot of times it's not people who really are working cases or know or understand cases. And so we wanted to kind of come to the table. It also gives us a way to raise money for the foundation. And so we actually have what's called coldcase.live. It's a website that people can go out to and they sign up for basically, I used to say a cup of coffee, but the last time I went to the coffee, it's a lot more than $2.99. Right now, we're still in our founders phase. So anybody who joins, even if it gets raised down the road, we've made a commitment to our founder phase that those people, we won't raise the price. So just another area or resource that we have available.
In this next segment, Dean talks about the way the foundation looks at cases through the lens of what they refer to as the 4 C's.
One of the ways that we look at investigations is through the lens of the 4 C's. And we have found that when cases have issues, it's usually one of these four or a combination of these that where there's conflict. So coordination, communication, cooperation, and collaboration. And they're actually talked about in the book that Greg wrote. Our next book will talk about the 5th C, which is compounding. And what we see is that when these four things are done in relationship to an investigation, the compounding of that over weeks and months is just unbelievably significant. And so while we use this in relationship to what we do in investigations, it's also a great model in so many different fields. And if you kind of think about where conflicts arise, it's usually one or a combination of these four areas.
Talk about some of the actual services that we provide as a foundation. Go over them. I know there's a bunch, and so the listeners and the students can understand what various types of things that we have as far as services that we can provide based on the experts that we have in our organization.
Just a real quick list of some of the things that we do, services we provide: investigative strategies, interview and interrogation strategies, prosecutive strategies, search warrant affidavits. We can help with, helping put those together, expert witness and testimony. We do have a national and actually international, because we have individuals that actually are from other countries that participate with us as well. We provide what we call a open source resource in what I consider to be a very proprietary world to law enforcement. Function a lot of times as a think tank, looking for best practices, multidiscipline. We'll do cold case analysis, criminal profiling, criminal investigative. We have forensic folks that will work with DNA testing issues, both labs and in the field. If you've heard of the MVAC system, we have one of the premier investigators that utilizes that, and she's actually developed what's called the Bardot method and has successfully pulled touch DNA off of shell casings and has gone through the court system. And so just a lot of great resources there. And then training and victims resources as well.
Greg developed the 10 filters of criminal profiling when he worked as a profiler with the FBI, and Dean is going to talk about those 10 filters.
The 10 filters of profiling, which he developed when he was training at the academy. And this is really the foundation that we use for the Cold Case Foundation. First and foremost, we look at the victimology. And I can tell you that as an organization, most victimologies that we end up with in cold cases are what I would consider to be shallow and narrow. Who the person was, their name, maybe what they did at work, maybe a little bit of family. And part of that comes from the fact that oftentimes they're single source. And so what happens is you're really getting one individual's perspective on that person. If we have a case where we're stuck, we always come back to victimology. I mean, this is our default. Let's go back. Let's relook at the victimology. And not only what we know, but what don't we know about the victim. And so we want to look at who's the source. So kind of think about your life, for example. If I wanted to really know all about you, first question probably would be, who do I even talk to? Now, I could talk to your mom or your dad, and they're going to give me one perspective, but your fellow, coworkers may have a different perspective on you. Your best friend may have. And so looking at that, and we also look at through the lens that every person has what we would consider to be a public life, a private life, and a secret life. Now, it doesn't mean that your secret life may be that nefarious. Some people could be very spiritual and nobody knows about that side of their life. So looking at those areas and really going through the victimology is a huge piece. And we look at the initial contact site. So where did these two people come in contact with each other? We look at the crime scene itself and all that's related there. And then the disposal site, where the body was left. Now, obviously, a lot of cases, those three collapse on top of into one, and it's all the same. They met at the same place, the crime scene's there, and the disposal site. But if we train people to look at them individually and distinctively and allow the evidence to collapse rather than making assumptions up front, we don't miss some of those specific clues that are there. Then we look at the physical assault. This is where the medical examiner's report and the autopsy comes into play. But we look separately at the sexual assault, which is number 6, from the physical assault. So we break those out. So, are there cases where there's a physical assault and not a sexual assault? Sure. But we want to make sure that we're always looking at that. And if there is a sexual assault, then we really want to go do a deep dive on that and understand all of the ramifications. And we've got courses that we teach on that as well. Then we look at what Greg was referring to earlier, and that's the MO versus the signature. Easy way to kind of help you remember that is MO is everything that's necessary to commit the crime, facilitate the escape, and also protect the identity of the offender. So anything that falls under that in general is where we look at MO. Signature is everything that's unnecessary. And so we look at everything. So maybe a couple of things to throw out there at you in this regard is, if a person gets stabbed, maybe the guy, that's what he uses, a knife, and he stabs people. But if I get a case that has 47 stab wounds, there's something else going on there, right? That we're looking more potentially, or if the body's posed. And so I do a deep dive into that. And then we look at whether or not this offender is organized or disorganized. And sometimes it's a combination. It may start out organized, but then defaults to some disorganized aspects. Then we look at the actual offender's risk. What was the risk level that this offender was willing to take to do their crime? And then the last one we look at is suspect information. And so those are kind of that's the filter. And if you think of it kind of like a gold mine, they take all of these huge buckets of material and they dump it in and they run it through all these different filters. And at the very end, a lot of stuff is thrown off to the side, but what you find are those little nuggets. And so what we're constantly looking at when we look at a case is anything's possible, but what's the probability? What's the most probable thing that can happen? So that's what we utilize as our main model that we do for looking at these various cases.
Thanks for providing that information to the students. I think that'll be very interesting for them to go and look at your website at www.coldcasefoundation.org, and if they have access to those 10 filters. If not, possibly even Google that. And now what I'd like for you to do is just please talk a little bit about what other services you provide to your clients.
In addition to that, one is a crime analysis report. So we actually have crime analysts. An agency can literally send us all of their material, everything they've got on it, and then our analysts will go through and do an analysis based on the 10 filters that we just talked about. And those reports can run anywhere from, I think, depending if there's a little bit of material, maybe 10 to 12 pages, and be as large as 50 or 60 pages long. It becomes a working document that we have an overview of what information we have on that case. Not only is what's been collected and the information that we have about it, but also questions that arise from that, as well as possible investigative tools or things that could be done in the investigation. So all 10 filters are applied to the case. And then below that, then we have a section where we look at all of the forensic evidence that's been brought in. So what's come in and what's been tested, what forensic evidence still exists, because in a lot of older cases, things have been lost, destroyed. And so we have to look through all of that. And then our forensic folks will take a look at that and then make recommendations. So they may say, okay, you've got this item. We would recommend that you do a DNA test on this. And it may have actually been done before, but maybe when it was done was enough years ago that the technology has really changed. And so we're in a new field here, a new opportunity. It also opens the door for them to help prioritize it. Greg mentioned earlier, we're working a lot of times with smaller and medium-sized agencies. They don't have big budgets. And so, able to say, okay, look, here's 5 recommendations. If you're going to do them, though, we would prioritize them to do this. At the end of our report, then we also add in the section from the crime classification manual. So the crime classification manual is just a great resource. It gives not only identifies the type of crime and so it's classified, but also some of the characteristics, as well as some recommendations for the actual process to investigate that crime. I know Greg authored at least a chapter in that crime classification manual. I think they're on the 4th or 5th edition. Some of the other resources that the Cold Case Foundation has is we actually have partner organizations. We work with Fight Canum Cold Case. These guys have cadaver dogs that they are able to deploy anywhere in the United States of America and look for human remains. We also work with large companies that have ground penetrating radar. We contacted them, and as we kind of talked through what our needs were, they said, well, what do you think about if you get a state where you need this item, you let us know, and we'll put you in contact with the number 1 or number 2 users of it in that state, and then you can work something out. And so far, as an organization, when we've reached out to these guys who run them all day long, tell them who we are, what we need it for. They're able to say, yeah, we'll come on board. And so far, they've donated their resources to us as an organization. So we also have a research team. Another name that might be something you've heard is Ann Burgess. Ann also co-authored a lot of research and has also worked for years with the FBI. And Ann is also a member of our team and works on our research team. And we work to look for anything that we can to help law enforcement do a better job at what they're doing. And that includes meeting with former offenders who are now incarcerated. And then that information we take and use that for training. We've been for the last probably 5 years working with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and we were brought in during Operation Lady Justice to provide training for their investigators, particularly in the murdered and missing cases. And so we've done a lot of training as well as across the United States of America. We also have internship. So we have college students that intern with the foundation. Unfortunately, people want to come on and be in internships, and everybody wants to get in the middle of the cases. And we're very careful with how much we give people exposure to these cases. But what has happened over the years is as people get on and they're developing in their career, our very first intern that ever came to work for us is now one of our analysts here for the foundation. So one of the things we look at is how can we partner and help people, give them opportunities and expertise in fields that they're really interested in.
Dean, for our students and for the audience that's listening, just tell us a little bit about the first case that was in the book that Greg wrote and how police back so many years ago didn't know how DNA was going to be used in the future, and tell us what they kept that was monumental in solving the case.
We've got the very first case that's in the book. These guys fished out 5 cigarette butts out of a toilet bowl and kept them all these years. And with the new DNA technology and stuff, they were able to get a match. Fortunately, by the time the offender was identified, he had passed away. But they were able to go back and use genealogy and family trees to actually identify him. Are there any common misconceptions about criminal profiling that you frequently encounter?
Well, it's like anything else, right? They think you can do it in 45 minutes and solve a case, and that we all fly in private jets. No and no. It takes hours to go through a case as it relates to profiling. It's not something that you can do. Now, I will say that there are those experiences where you have what we refer to as threshold diagnosis. And to me, it's kind of a culmination and a combination of experience, training, education. And when I say experience, I'm talking about looking at hundreds to thousands of cases over a career, and you'll get those what you might refer to as moments of intuition, but it's mostly related back to those things I mentioned. And I'm not one that takes the spiritual things out of our job. You've heard of police officer discretion, intuition, a gut instinct, those kinds of things. And that's more of the metaphysical or spiritual side of life and of the job itself. And I think that there's probably every profession, particularly those dealing with life and death situations and high risk situations, whether it's in the medical field or something like law enforcement, first responders, obviously, I think gives one so many experiences that it develops and allows you to develop a more keener approach and sensitive approach to certain things that may occur to you in the moment. I've experienced it in the moment as I've looked at a case, but it's developed over time and over years of experience.
I would say another thing too is that when you work with profilers and you watch how they do the work that they're doing, at the end of the day, it's still, you've got to find the evidence, right? You still have to have, somebody's not going to go because a profiler has a gut instinct, but that gut instinct can really help laser focus that investigation and really keep the investigators they don't get caught up in being distracted by maybe things that really are superfluous or don't really fit.
We've either dazzled or baffled.
In this next portion of our episode, Dean talks a little bit about how in the beginning they were looking for a certain type of individual to be part of their organization so they wouldn't have to train them, and how it has progressed through time to current people that they've gotten into the foundation.
This is what's interesting about the foundation. When we first started, to do something in the vision Greg had, where do you go to find people that know and that we don't have to train and start, if you're starting an organization. And so we really went after a lot of retired or almost ready or semi-retired folks just because of their wealth of knowledge and their expertise. I would say today, so many of the people that are coming into the foundation are not just retired folks, but we have a huge influx now of people who are currently in the middle of their career. And the reason for that, I think, and I'll give you one analogy. We had somebody come on board in their community, they saw lots of homicides, but almost all of them were gang related. And so they came to us saying, look, I want to be a part of the Cold Case Foundation because all I get to look at are gang related cases. And I want to learn other areas and different types of cases. And so they came on board to really be able to expand their experience. For us, it's a win-win because now we have people on our team who are experts in gang-related cases, and so we can utilize them, but it also lets them learn. And so our goal with the foundation, you look for models where you're looking at. All of our folks really function like Uber drivers in the sense that we don't just dump a caseload on them. What we do is when we have cases and we have needs, we reach out to them. If they're available, then they're able to work with us. And the other model that we looked at was Amazon. And the reason we picked that as kind of a model, I remember when Amazon first started and driving around and hearing advertisements that they were the world's largest bookstore. And I got all excited and I wanted to go see this place. And then I realized very quickly that it wasn't the world's largest bookstore. What it was it was literally a network of businesses. And if you told Amazon the book you wanted, they would find somebody to send it to you. And so today, when we all think of Amazon, if you're looking for anything to buy, probably somebody will say, hey, have you checked Amazon? I bet you can get it on Amazon. And so our goal with the Cold Case Foundation, can we be an organization for cold cases that really when people say, hey, we're stuck or we've got a cold case here, people say, reach out to the Cold Case Foundation.
There was one question in here. How do you manage stress and maintain objectivity when dealing with violent offenders?
You do compartmentalize. The effect, the impact that this work has is to make you even more paranoid, not for yourself, but for your family, because you're seeing women and children daily, on a daily basis, being victimized in the most heinous ways. And so the only way that I could deal with that for me was, number one, teach concepts to my family about victimology and risk, low, medium, high risk, etc. And try to prepare them as they go out into the world in dealing with individuals and experiences that otherwise they wouldn't know necessarily how best to deal with it, and not to be over concerned about the sensitivities of people's feelings because they don't know a stranger, for example, who may come up and give some unwanted, unsolicited attention, that we all have the right to tell that individual, look, you're not making me, I'm not comfortable in your presence, and I want you to step away from me, or whatever the situation may be. But we have to take those very assertive actions in those moments and listen to what I like to refer to as the voice. The concept is we do have this gift as human beings called intuition, gut instinct, etc., whatever you want to refer to it as. And the more we listen to it, the keener and more sensitive we can become to it. And it becomes more an effective tool in our life, not just dealing with difficult adversities in life, but also the strength and sensitivities to danger and risk. There's a good book out there that was written a number of years ago called The Gift of Fear by Gavin de Becker. He was a former Secret Service agent. And while he addresses it as the gift of fear, my sense is I call it the voice. And that in all the cases that he looked at, in this particular book, these victims experienced what he referred to as the gift of fear, that there was some sense of dread, a sense of concern, awkwardness, being uncomfortable in the presence of a person, the way they may look at you, talk to you, approach you, and then trying to coddle it, if you will, meaning you don't want to offend people for fear of offending an individual. You may even extend that risk level to spend more time with them because you don't want to offend them. And my plea to you and anybody that we discuss these things with is don't worry about offending people. And even if they are offended by it, that's their problem. If they are offended by it, there's further evidence that this individual is not the one you want to be around anyway. If you know who you're with, you're comfortable in their presence. If you're not, then you immediately have to take action. Don't try to dissuade yourself, because in the final analysis, there's only one person that you can depend on for your own safety, and it's yourself. So don't worry about offending somebody, a stranger especially.
And I have one other thing to add. Nothing happens good after 1 a.m.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. To your stress question, I serve on the state of Utah's critical incident stress team, and we talk about this a lot. And an analogy, and for those of you who are looking at going into this field, think of your life. All of us have different containers, but let's assume we'll use the analogy of a glass. Each one of us have a cup or a glass, and we can only handle so much stress. And when people are in crisis, it's because so much is in there that it overflows. And so you can't be in this business and say, I'm not going to have stress and I'm not going to, because that's not true. But I think we all have ways in which we know the things in our life that increase stress and the things in our life that decrease it. There are hobbies and things that I like to do that those are my decreasers. And so where I spend a lot of my time is being honest with myself about where my stress level is. And if it's filling up, then I need to increase over here and find ways, because where I don't want to get is an overflow. I think you can't be in this field and not have stress. There's just too many things that come to the table with it. But I think you can manage it by implementing those.
We hope you found this episode of Criminology Chats engaging and insightful. A special thanks to Greg and Dean for joining us today. For more information about the Cold Case Foundation, please visit www.coldcasefoundation.org. If you are interested in internships with the foundation, feel free to reach out to us at Crim Podcast, that's CRIMPODCAST, at thechicagoschool.edu. We also welcome your comments, suggestions, and requests at the same email address. Criminology Chats is brought to you by the Chicago School. For more information about the institution, please visit www.thechicagoschool.edu. I would like to extend my gratitude to the students who participated in this episode. This podcast is produced and edited by A.M. Peters, with additional post services provided by Audio Photosynthesis. I'd like to give a special shout out to her, because if it wasn't for her, this episode and all episodes would not be possible. So thank you so much, Amy. I'm J.R. Rainbolt, your host, and I eagerly anticipate you listening to our next episode. Be safe out there.
The views and perspectives shared in these recordings are intended solely for informational purposes and do not reflect the official stance or policies of the speakers or the Chicago School. Any commercial products and manufacturers mentioned are included for informational reasons only and do not imply endorsement or approval by the speakers or the Chicago School.